We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union.
I think too often we assume that the United States had always been united. From the period of the Declaration of Independence, if not earlier, we had been united in opposition to Britain, in opposition to the other enemies of the American Republic, that we'd always been united, but actually it's just the opposite.
Without the all-consuming mission of war to hold the country together, regional and ideological differences resurfaced. The Congress trying to govern under the Articles of Confederation was largely ineffectual.
The whole theory of Confederation is that the Congress would propose what the states ought to do, and I emphasize the ought. But Congress had no mechanism, or actually no authority or mechanism to enforce its resolutions, its recommendations, its requisitions for supplies and for taxation. So there's a basic problem of enforcement under the Articles of Confederation. I mean, the states, I think, were trying as hard as they could, but they had problems of their own, and it came to be perceived that a union that relied always on the voluntary goodwill of the states could not really last very long or function very effectively.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice.
With 13 different political entities making laws, a whole new set of legal concerns began to proliferate. If all the states were sovereign, who had the authority to arbitrate in quarrels between the states? Conflicts over matters of trade, commerce, monetary policy, and borders were straining interstate allegiances.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility.
In the fall of 1786, a group of armed farmers marched on some of the county courthouses in western Massachusetts. Led by a former Army officer, Daniel Shays, they were protesting excessive taxes imposed by the state legislature.
Madison, who is often considered the father of the Constitution, was not only concerned about the weakness, what he called the imbecility of the Confederation, but he was concerned about the power of majorities in the state legislatures and the way in which they were creating injustice and creating problems within the states. And for him, Shays' Rebellion confirmed his feeling that if Massachusetts couldn't solve its problems, then what state could?
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense.
Despite the promise of being bound to one another to come to one another's aid, should attacks occur, in spite of the promise or pledging themselves to providing for the cost of this kind of defense through a common treasury, none of that was forthcoming when the Shays' Rebellion took place. In the end, Massachusetts pretty much had to raise the money on its own to put down the rebellion.
Providing for the common defense was not a minor concern in the United States in the 1780s. Ongoing conflict with Indian peoples on the frontier, combined with the continuing military presence of Britain and Spain on the continent, posed a constant threat to the security of the young nation.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare.
Perhaps the biggest threat to national security during this time was economic in nature. The 1780s was a time of financial turbulence.
Part of the Depression is due simply to demobilization, a lessening of demand for supplies and services as a result of the end of the War of Independence. But also the Depression, the economic depression, was due to actions taken by Great Britain, closing off, for example, much of the trade to the British West Indies, which had been important for the American colonies.
Many British merchants also refused to extend credit, making it virtually impossible for American merchants to conduct business overseas.
And one way of responding, obviously, would be that if Britain has restricted our access to certain markets, then we should retaliate. I mean, if they place duties on our goods, shouldn't we place duties on their goods?
But under the Articles of Confederation, Congress had no power to establish a uniform trade policy. Therefore, any state could, and did, pursue its own self-interest at the expense of the other states.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
In the minds of the Founding Fathers, the way to secure the blessings of liberty for the future was to gain control over the Northwest Territory and develop procedures for settling those lands.
The Northwest Ordinance provided the means for establishing a way of governing the territories. Once you achieve the status of 60,000 inhabitants and apply for statehood and are admitted, you're a full participating member equal to the original 13, which is important. So one major accomplishment is doing all of this in terms of political tutelage towards equality. The second is that the Northwest Ordinance prohibited slavery from those territories in the Old Northwest.
The Northwest Ordinance was one area in which Congress, under the Articles of Confederation, was able to be effective. Still, many leaders of the new nation agreed that the Articles were insufficient and needed to be revised. Among these, a smaller group including George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison believed that more drastic measures were necessary, and they began quietly to push for a reconceptualization of the entire federal government.